Jake Morrison pushed his mop cart down the long hallway of the Galactic Naval Academy. The wheels squeaked softly on the polished floor. It was past midnight, and the academy was quiet except for the hum of air systems and distant footsteps of security guards making their rounds. He liked this time of night. The alien cadets were asleep in their dormitories. The instructors had gone home to their families or were busy in their private offices. The maintenance crew was the smallest during the night shift, which meant fewer people to talk to and fewer questions about why a human wanted to work the lonely hours. Jake had been doing this job for 3 years now. 3 years of mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and cleaning classrooms where the future leaders of the galaxy learned how to command starships and fight battles. 3 years of being invisible. The Zephyrian cadets barely looked at him when he cleaned around their study groups. These tall, thin aliens had skin that looked like crystal and voices that sounded like wind chimes. They spoke in whispers about advanced physics and star navigation, treating Jake like he was part of the furniture. Sometimes they would leave, their homework scattered on tables, and Jake would see calculations for jump drives and weapon systems that could destroy entire planets. The Corvin students were different. These big, muscled aliens looked like bears that learned to walk on 2 legs. They had thick fur and small, bright eyes that missed nothing. When Jake cleaned their classrooms after combat training sessions, they would grunt and move out of his way without looking at him. But Jake could feel them watching. Corvins were natural warriors, and even the young ones had instincts that told them when someone nearby might be dangerous. Jake kept his head down and worked quietly. He wore the same gray coveralls as all the other maintenance workers. His name, tag said J. Morrison in simple letters. His hair was brown with gray showing at the sides, and his face had lines that came from too much sun and not enough sleep. His hands were rough from years of work, but they moved carefully when he cleaned delicate equipment in the science labs. The other maintenance workers were mostly Deltans, refugees from a planet that had been destroyed in a mining accident 20 years ago. They were grateful to have jobs and didn't ask many questions about each other's past. Jake shared coffee with them during breaks and listened to their stories about families back on the refugee stations. They thought he was just another human who had found steady work at the academy. Nobody knew that Jake woke up every morning at 5 to do push-ups and sit-ups in his small apartment. Nobody saw him practice hand-to-hand combat moves in his living room or clean the old military pistol he kept hidden in his closet. Nobody noticed how his eyes automatically checked every entrance and exit when he entered a room, or how he always kept his back to a wall when possible. Most importantly, nobody had seen the tattoo on his neck. Jake kept his coveralls buttoned all the way up. Even when the academy's climate control made the hallways warm, the collar hid the small but distinctive mark that had been burned into his skin 15 years ago. It was a simple design, a skull with wings and a single star above it. To most people, it would look like old military ink that had faded with time. But to the right person, someone who knew military history, it would mean everything. The Ghost Battalion had been Earth's most elite special forces unit during the War of the Seven Suns. 37 soldiers who could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear before the enemy knew what had hit them. They had been the reason the war ended 2 years early. They had also been the reason Jake Morrison was supposed to be dead. Jake finished mopping the main hallway and moved his cart toward the advanced tactics classroom. This was where Commander Vex taught future officers how to plan battles and make the hard decisions that would keep their crews alive. The Thraxian instructor was one of the few beings at the academy who sometimes nodded to Jake when their paths crossed. Thraxians valued all forms of service, even cleaning floors. The classroom was a mess after the day's lesson. The holographic battle display was still running, showing the final moments of the Battle of Kepler Station. Jake had been there for the real thing, but he didn't let his expression change as he watched the tactical simulation. The official version was close to what had actually happened, but it left out some important details. Jake began cleaning, working around the desks. Where cadets had left their notes and data tablets, he could read 17 different alien languages, a skill that had kept him alive during deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. Tonight, he saw study notes about supply line protection, fleet movement patterns, and the psychological effects of long-term space combat. All useful information, filed away in his mind out of old habit. A data tablet on the back desk caught his attention. The screen showed a research paper about human military tactics during the War of the Seven Suns. Jake glanced around to make sure he was alone, then looked closer. The student was writing about the effectiveness of small unit operations, with a whole section about the mysterious Ghost Battalion, according to official records. The Ghost Battalion had been completely destroyed when their transport ship was ambushed during an evacuation mission. All 37 members were listed as killed in action. Their missions were still classified, their methods still secret. The cadets' paper described them as legends. Soldiers who had changed the course of the war through courage and sacrifice. Jake finished reading and moved on. He had learned long ago not to dwell on the past or wonder what might have been different. The war was over. The galaxy had moved on. Peace had brought new challenges and new opportunities. The Academy trained officers from dozens of species to work together to prevent the kind of devastating conflict that had nearly torn apart 3 star systems. But sometimes, usually during the quiet hours of his night shift, Jake wondered if he had made the right choice. Could have tried to contact Earth's military command after he recovered from his injuries. Could have explained what had happened, gone through the bureaucracy of being officially declared alive, and returned to active duty. Instead, he had chosen to disappear. The decision had seemed logical at the time. The Ghost Battalion's missions had involved actions that were necessary during wartime, but uncomfortable to remember during peace. Governments preferred to let sleeping ghosts lie. Jake had been badly injured, presumed dead, and facing months of recovery time. By the time he was healthy enough to make contact, the war had ended and he had become an inconvenient complication to a galaxy trying to heal. So he had chosen a different path. He found work on civilian ships, then on space stations, finally settling on the Academy when he realized he wanted to stay in one place for a while. The job was simple, the pay was enough to live on, and nobody asked difficult questions about his background. Jake pushed his cart into the supply closet and began putting away his cleaning equipment. His shift was almost over, and he was tired. Tomorrow night would bring the same routine, empty classrooms, quiet hallways, and the comfortable anonymity of being just another maintenance worker. As he walked toward the employee exit, Jake passed a group of security monitors that showed different areas of the Academy. The night shift guards were making their rounds, checking locks and watching for problems. On one screen, Jake could see Cadet Lisa Park still working in the xenobiology lab. The young human woman often stayed late, and Jake had noticed her dedication to her studies. Jake nodded to the security guard at the exit and stepped into the cool night air. Above him, 3 moons lit the Academy grounds with pale light. In the distance, he could see the lights of the main city and the spaceport where ships arrived daily from across the galaxy. He walked to his small apartment, already thinking about tomorrow's shift and the simple, invisible life he had built for himself. Jake Morrison, Custodian, keeper of floors and emptier of trash cans. It was a good life, a quiet life, and it was enough. At least it had been enough until everything changed. The xenobiology lab was supposed to be empty by 10 o'clock every night. Jake knew this because he had been cleaning the Academy for 3 years and had memorized every schedule, every routine, every rule that kept the massive institution running smoothly. So, when he saw lights still on in Lab 7 at midnight, he knew something was wrong. Jake pushed his cart closer to the lab doors and listened. Inside, he could hear the soft hum of specimen containers and the quiet sound of someone working. He checked his duty roster. No scheduled late experiments, no approved overnight research. Someone was breaking Academy regulations. He knocked on the door and waited. Footsteps approached, quick and nervous. The door opened to reveal Cadet Lisa Park, a young human woman in her final year at the Academy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her Academy uniform was wrinkled. From hours of work, she looked tired and worried. "Oh, it's just you," Lisa said, then immediately looked embarrassed. Hello, Jake. I didn't expect anyone to be around this late. Jake had noticed Lisa before during his cleaning rounds. She was one of the few cadets who actually acknowledged him when their paths crossed. Unlike most students who looked through him as if he didn't exist, Lisa would nod or say hello. She was studying to be a tactical officer, specializing in xenobiology and alien combat analysis. Lab should be closed, Jake said quietly. Everything okay?
Yes.
Lisa bit her lip and glanced back into the lab. I'm working on my senior thesis.
Yes.
Due next week, and I'm behind schedule. I know I'm not supposed to be here this late, but I really need to finish this research. Jake could see the stress in her face. Academy regulations were strict, and getting caught in an unauthorized lab session could mean serious trouble. But he also knew what it was like to be young and desperate to prove yourself. What kind of research? He asked. Lisa hesitated. Most people at the academy treated maintenance staff like they were invisible or stupid, but something in Jake's voice made her think he might actually understand. I'm studying combat adaptations in different alien species, she said. How their biology affects their fighting styles and tactical preferences. My advisor thinks it could be useful for future officers who need to work with mixed species crews. Jake nodded. It was smart research, the kind of thing that could save lives in real combat situations. During the war, understanding alien psychology and physical capabilities had been crucial for survival. Show me, Jake said. Lisa looked surprised, but opened the door wider. The lab was filled with specimen containers, each one holding preserved examples of different alien creatures. Some were small and harmless, like the butterfly creatures from the Andorian system. Others were larger and more dangerous, kept in specially reinforced containment units. Lisa led him to her workstation, where she had been analyzing tissue samples and running computer simulations. Her research was thorough and well organized, the kind of work that took real dedication and intelligence. This is fascinating, Jake said, and he meant it. You've identified adaptation patterns that most people miss. Lisa looked pleased but also confused. You understand this stuff? Jake realized he had said too much. A custodian wasn't supposed to know about xenobiology or combat analysis. He was about to make an excuse when an alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the lab, and an automated voice announced containment breach in Section C. All personnel evacuate immediately. Lisa's face went white. Oh no, oh no, no, no. She ran toward the back of the lab, where the most dangerous specimens were kept. Jake followed, his cleaning cart forgotten. In Section C, one of the containment units was open, its reinforced door. Hanging loose inside, the unit was empty. What was in there? Jake asked, though his tone had changed. It was no longer the quiet voice of a custodian. It was the sharp, focused voice of someone who understood danger. Void Stalker, Lisa whispered. It's a predator from the dark spaces between stars. We use them to train students about unknown threats and stealth tactics. Jake felt his blood turn cold. He had encountered Void Stalkers during the war, and they were among the most dangerous creatures in known space. They were roughly the size of a large dog, but moved like liquid shadow. They could climb walls, squeeze through spaces that seemed too small, and they hunted by sensing fear and movement. Did it get out? Jake demanded. I don't know. I was working at my station when the alarm went off. The containment unit has 3 different locking mechanisms. It shouldn't be possible for it to escape on its own. Jake looked at the open unit more carefully. The locks hadn't been broken from the inside. Someone had opened them incorrectly, probably by entering the wrong sequence or using the emergency release. Lisa had made a mistake while working alone and tired. We need to evacuate and call the containment team, Lisa said, her voice shaking. Academy protocol requires immediate notification when a Class A specimen escapes. What happens to you if we do that? Jake asked. Lisa closed her eyes. Automatic failure of my thesis project. Possible suspension or expulsion. The review board doesn't like students who break safety protocols. Jake understood. Lisa had worked for years to get to this point, and one mistake could destroy her career before it started, but a Void Stalker loose in the academy was extremely dangerous. These creatures were intelligent hunters that could kill multiple people before anyone realized what was happening. Where would it go? Jake asked. They like dark, narrow spaces. Ventilation systems, maintenance tunnels, anywhere they can move without being seen. They're ambush predators that wait for prey to come to them. Jake looked up at the ventilation grate near the ceiling. The metal cover was slightly askew, and there were scratch marks around the edges. The Void Stalker had gone up into the air system. I can track it, Jake said. What? Your maintenance staff? Not a hunter. These things are incredibly dangerous. Jake was already moving toward his cleaning cart. Hidden among the supplies were tools he had modified over the years, a high-powered flashlight that could serve as a weapon, cleaning chemicals that could be used to create smoke or distractions, and a long-handled brush that was actually a disguised fighting stick. I know the ventilation system better than anyone, Jake said. I clean it every week, and I know how these creatures think. That last part was true, though Jake couldn't explain why without revealing his past. During the war, Ghost Battalion had been sent to clear Void Stalkers from captured space stations. Jake had learned their hunting patterns, their weaknesses, and how to fight them in close quarters. Lisa watched in amazement as Jake transformed before her eyes. The quiet Custodian was gone, replaced by someone who moved with deadly purpose and professional calm. He checked his improvised weapons, studied the scratch marks on the ventilation grate, and began tracking the creature's path through the lab. Still close, Jake said quietly. Void Stalkers don't like to travel far from their initial hiding spot. It's probably directly above us, waiting to see what we do. How do you know all this? Lisa asked. Jake didn't answer. He was focused on the hunt, using skills he hadn't needed for 3 years, but had never forgotten. He moved through the lab like a soldier, checking corners and watching for movement in the shadows. The attack came without warning. The Void Stalker dropped from the ceiling directly onto Jake's back, its claws seeking the soft spots in his neck. But Jake was ready. He rolled forward, throwing the creature off balance, and came up swinging his improvised fighting stick. The battle was brief, but vicious. The Void Stalker was fast and intelligent, but Jake was faster and more experienced. He used the lab equipment to his advantage, driving the creature toward the containment unit with controlled aggression and tactical precision. Within minutes, the Void Stalker was back in its containment unit, secured behind multiple locks. Stood breathing heavily, his coveralls torn, and his hands bleeding from minor cuts. Lisa stared at him in complete shock. "Who are you?" she whispered. Jake realized he had made a terrible mistake. In saving Lisa and containing the creature, he had revealed skills that no Custodian should possess. But it was when he reached up to wipe sweat from his forehead that the real disaster happened. His collar shifted. For just a moment, Lisa saw the edge of his tattoo. Distinctive markings were partially hidden, but she caught enough to recognize the symbol. Her eyes went wide with disbelief. "No, that's impossible," she breathed. Jake quickly pulled his collar back into place, but it was too late. Lisa had seen the Ghost Battalion tattoo, the mark that identified him as a member of the most elite military unit in Earth's history, a unit that was supposed to be completely dead. "Please," Jake said quietly, "don't tell anyone what happened." "Here tonight," Lisa nodded slowly, still staring at him like she was seeing a ghost, which in a way she was. Jake gathered his cleaning supplies and left the lab, his mind racing. After 3 years of careful anonymity, his secret was out. Quiet Custodian was gone forever, and Jake Morrison had no idea what would happen next. Lisa Park could not sleep. It had been 3 days since the incident in the xenobiology lab, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same thing. Jake Morrison, moving like a trained killer, fighting the Void Stalker with skills that no Custodian should possess. And that tattoo on his neck, the partial symbol that had made her blood run cold. She sat in her dormitory room at 2 in the morning, staring at her computer screen. For the past 72 hours, she had been researching everything she could find about the Ghost Battalion. What she discovered made her question everything she thought she knew about the War of the Seven Suns. The official records were brief and heavily classified, The Ghost Battalion had been formed during the second year of the war, when Earth's regular forces were losing badly against the Corvan Empire and their allies. 37 volunteers from various military units had been selected for an program in deep reconnaissance and sabotage operations. Lisa found mission reports that had been declassified years after the war ended. The Ghost Battalion had been sent behind enemy lines to gather intelligence, destroy supply depots, and eliminate high-value targets. Their success rate had been incredible. 93% of missions completed successfully, with minimal casualties. But it was the final mission that caught Lisa's attention. According to official records, the entire Ghost Battalion had been killed when their evacuation transport was ambushed by Corvan fighters. The ship had been destroyed with all hands aboard. Every member of the unit was declared killed in action and awarded posthumous medals for their service. Lisa pulled up the casualty list. There, halfway down the page, was a name that made her heart race. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, age 27, tactical specialist and demolitions expert, killed in action, Kepler system, final year of the war. But Jake Morrison was alive. He was mopping floors at the academy where she studied, hiding in plain sight among the children of the very aliens his unit had fought against. Lisa leaned back in her chair, trying to understand how this was possible. She had grown up hearing stories about the war heroes who had secured humanity's place in the galactic community. Her parents had met during the reconstruction efforts after the war, and they had always spoken with reverence about the soldiers who had died to end the conflict. The Ghost Battalion were legends, mentioned in the same breath as the great naval commanders and diplomatic pioneers. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Lisa quickly closed her research files and opened the door to find her best friend and study partner, Danny Wright. Danny was everything Lisa was not: tall, confident, and born into privilege as the son of a Terran colonial governor. But he was also smart, loyal, and had become one of her closest friends during their years at the academy. He was one of the few people she could trust with difficult secrets. "You look terrible," Danny said, settling into her desk chair. "You've been weird for 3 days. What's going on?" Lisa hesitated. She had promised Jake she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened in the lab. But the weight of what she had discovered was crushing her, and she needed someone to help her understand what it all meant. "If I tell you something, you have to promise to keep it secret," Lisa said. "Of course. What's wrong?" Lisa took a deep breath and told him everything. The late night in the lab, the escaped Void Stalker, Jake's incredible fighting skills, and the tattoo she had glimpsed on his neck. Danny listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with every word. "Are you sure about the tattoo?" Danny asked when she finished. "I've been researching it for 3 days, I'm sure." "Danny, I think Jake Morrison is a member of the Ghost Battalion, but according to official records, they're all dead." Danny was quiet for a long moment. He had grown up in political circles and understood better than most how governments sometimes buried inconvenient truths. His father had told him stories about the war that never made it into the official histories. "Show me what you found," Danny said. Lisa pulled up her research files, and they spent the next 2 hours going through everything she had discovered. Danny asked sharp questions and helped her piece together a timeline that made sense. By the time they finished, both cadets were convinced that Jake Morrison was exactly who Lisa thought he was. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Danny said. "If he's been hiding his identity for 3 years, he probably has good reasons. But he's a war hero," Lisa protested. "Deserves recognition for what he did. The Ghost Battalion saved thousands of lives with their missions. Maybe he doesn't want recognition. Maybe he just wants to be left alone." Lisa understood Danny's point, but she couldn't let go of the mystery. Over the next few days, she began watching Jake more carefully. During her late-night study sessions, she noticed things she had missed before: how he moved through the academy hallways with perfect situational awareness, how his eyes automatically tracked every entrance and exit, how he seemed to know exactly when to appear and disappear to avoid attention. She also noticed that he was watching her back. Their eyes would meet across the library or in the corridors, and she could see the worry in his expression. Jake knew that she had seen too much, and he was trying to figure out what she planned to do about it. It was Danny who first suggested they try to talk to Jake directly. If we're right about who he is, then we're probably not the first people to figure it out. He might be relieved to have someone to talk to. But their careful observations had not gone unnoticed by others. The academy was home to students and instructors from dozens of species, and not all of them had forgotten the grievances of the war. Some alien families still harbored resentment toward the human units that had dealt the most damage to their homeworlds during the conflict. Commander Crix was one such individual. The Corvin instructor taught advanced combat tactics and had lost 2 brothers during the war. He had always been professional in his dealings with human students. But Lisa began to notice that he was asking questions about Jake during faculty meetings. She overheard conversations between Crix and other instructors about the unusually skilled maintenance worker who seemed to know too much about military matters. Lisa realized that she and Danny were not the only ones who had noticed Jake's unusual abilities. Others were watching him too, and their intentions might not be friendly. The Ghost Battalion had been particularly effective against Corvin strongholds during the war, and there were still Corvin separatists who had never accepted the peace treaty. One evening, Lisa made a decision that would change everything. She stayed late in the library until she was sure Jake would be cleaning nearby, then approached him directly. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Jake looked around to make sure they were alone, then nodded. "I know. Come with me." He led her to a maintenance room in the basement of the academy, a place where they could speak without being overheard. Danny was waiting there, having been told to meet them by Lisa. "How much do you know?" Jake asked without preamble. "We know. You're Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison of the Ghost Battalion," Lisa said. "We know you're supposed to be dead. And we know that some people at the academy are starting to ask questions about you." Jake sat down heavily on a supply crate. For the first time since Lisa had known him, he looked tired and old, never wanted anyone to find out, he said. "I chose this life because I wanted to disappear. The war is over. The galaxy has moved on. There's no place for ghosts in the new world." "But you're a hero," Danny said. "Your unit shortened the war by months. You saved countless lives." Jake laughed bitterly. "Heroes are for history books and memorial services. Real soldiers just do their jobs and try to survive. I survived when my friends didn't, and I've been living with that for 15 years. Lisa felt a surge of sympathy for the man who had been carrying such a heavy burden alone. "What happened to you? How did you survive when the others didn't?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The transport was ambushed, just like the official reports say, but I wasn't on it. I was on a separate mission, supposed to meet up with the unit at the evacuation point. By the time I got there, the ship was gone and the system was crawling. With enemy fighters, spent 3 months hiding on a dead moon, waiting for rescue that never came." "Why didn't you contact Earth Command when you finally got out?" Danny asked. "By the time I was rescued by neutral traders, the war was over. I was badly injured, presumed dead, and facing months of recovery. The new government was focused on rebuilding and reconciliation. Ghosts from the war's darkest operations was the last thing they wanted to deal with." Lisa began to understand. Jake had chosen anonymity over the complicated process of officially returning from the dead. He had found a way to serve quietly, without forcing anyone to confront uncomfortable truths about what had been necessary to win the war. "We won't tell anyone," Lisa promised. "Your secret is safe with us." But even as she spoke, Lisa knew it might be too late. Others had noticed Jake's unusual skills, and some of them had long memories and old grudges. The quiet custodian's days of invisibility were numbered, and trouble was coming whether he wanted it or not. The attack came on a Thursday night when most of the academy was asleep. Jake was in the central archives, cleaning the computer terminals where instructors stored their lesson plans and student records. It was quiet work that he usually enjoyed. But tonight something felt wrong. The first sign of trouble was the sudden darkness. All the lights in the building went out at exactly midnight, leaving Jake in complete blackness. Emergency power should have kicked in within seconds, but the backup systems stayed silent. Someone had disabled them from the outside. Jake dropped his cleaning supplies and moved toward the nearest wall. During his 3 years at the academy, he had memorized every room, every corridor, every possible escape route. In total darkness, he could still navigate the building better than most people could with full lighting. The sound of breaking glass came from the main entrance, followed by the soft footsteps of people trying to move quietly. Jake counted at least 6 sets of boots, maybe more. They were wearing military gear. He could hear the subtle sounds of equipment and weapons. Jake's mind shifted into combat mode for the first time in 3 years. These were not random thieves or academy troublemakers. This was a professional military operation, and they were here for a specific target. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone had been watching him, planning this moment. He moved carefully toward his cleaning cart, feeling in the darkness for the tools he had modified over the years. His flashlight could serve as a weapon. The long-handled brush was actually a fighting stick, and hidden in the bottom of the cart was something he had hoped never to use again. A military combat knife from his Ghost Battalion days. The attackers were moving through the academy with purpose, not searching randomly, but heading directly toward the archives. They knew where to find him, which meant they had been watching him for some time. Jake cursed silently. He had gotten comfortable, let his guard down, and now people would pay the price for his carelessness. He heard voices speaking in low tones, Corvan language which he understood perfectly. The words made his blood run cold. Target confirmed in Central Archives. Ghost confirmed alive. Execute termination protocol. Jake realized this was not a robbery or a terrorist attack. This was an assassination mission, and he was the target. Somehow, his true identity had been discovered by people who wanted revenge for the Ghost Battalion's wartime operations. The Corvan separatists had never accepted the peace treaty that ended the War of the Seven Suns. They believed their people had been betrayed by weak leaders who gave up too easily. For 15 years, they had been hunting down the human soldiers who had dealt the most damage to their cause during the war. Jake heard them entering the archive section. Their movements coordinated and professional. These were not angry civilians, seeking random revenge. These were trained soldiers who had planned this operation carefully. He needed to move, but he also needed to warn others. The academy dormitories were full of sleeping students who would be helpless if these attackers decided to expand their mission. Jake activated his emergency communicator, the same device all academy staff carried for safety situations. Security. Breach in Central Archives, he whispered into the device. Armed intruders. Lock down all dormitories immediately. The response came back in a confused voice. Who is this? Identify yourself. Just do it, Jake said, then turned off the communicator. He could not waste time explaining his authority to make such demands. The attackers had heard his transmission and were moving faster now. Jake heard them splitting up, trying to surround his position, but they were fighting on his territory. Now in a building he knew better than his own apartment, Jake moved through the archives like a ghost, using maintenance tunnels and service corridors that most people did not even know existed. He had cleaned these spaces for 3 years, and every hiding spot, every alternate route, every tactical advantage was burned into his memory. The first attacker came around, a corner expecting to find a helpless custodian. Instead, he found a deadly opponent who struck from the shadows and disappeared before he could raise his weapon. Jake's fighting stick caught the Corvan soldier across the throat, dropping him silently. The second attacker was more careful, using infrared sensors to track movement in the darkness, but Jake had fought in worse conditions during the war, and he knew how to defeat thermal imaging. He rolled across the cold floor, masking his heat signature, and came up behind his target. The battle that followed would have impressed his old Ghost Battalion instructors. Jake moved through the darkened academy like a professional killer, using every trick he had learned during the war. He turned the building itself into a weapon, using his knowledge of the layout to create ambushes and escape routes. But Jake was not fighting alone. Lisa Park and Danny Wright had been studying late in the library when the lights went out. Instead of hiding in their dormitories like most students, they had heard Jake's emergency transmission and decided to help. Lisa activated her cadet emergency communicator and began coordinating with other students who were trapped in the building. Danny used his knowledge of academy security protocols to guide students to safe areas and help them avoid the attackers. "We need to help Jake," Lisa said as they moved through the dark corridors. "We don't even know where he is," Danny replied. "And we're not soldiers." But Lisa had been watching Jake for weeks, learning his patterns and routines. She had a good idea where he would go in a crisis situation. The maintenance tunnels that connected all the major buildings, places where a custodian would have complete knowledge and tactical advantage. They found their way to a service entrance and began moving through the narrow passages that Jake used for his daily work. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of fighting, brief, violent encounters followed by silence. "He's taking them out one by one," Danny whispered. "But there are too many of them," Lisa agreed. Even if Jake was as skilled as she believed, he was outnumbered and fighting in a building full of innocent students. He needed help, and they were the only ones in position to provide it. They emerged from the tunnels near the main communication center, where the Academy's emergency systems were controlled. If they could restore power and activate the defense systems, they could give Jake the advantage he needed. But the communication center was guarded by two Corvin attackers who had been left to prevent exactly this kind of interference. Lisa and Danny looked at each other, knowing they were about to do something incredibly dangerous. "We're not trained for this," Danny said. "Neither were the people who fought in the war," Lisa replied. "Sometimes you just have to do what's right." They attacked together, using surprise and desperation to overcome their lack of combat training. Danny tackled one attacker while Lisa grabbed a fire extinguisher and used it as a weapon against the other. It was messy and terrifying, but they managed to disable both guards and reach the communication controls. Lisa's fingers flew over the emergency systems, restoring power to the building and activating the Academy's defensive measures. Lights came on throughout the complex. Automated security doors began sealing off sections to trap the remaining attackers. On the main communication system, she broadcast a message that reached every room in the Academy. All students remain in secure areas. Security forces en route. The custodian Jake Morrison is defending the Academy. Support him if possible. The message was heard not just by students, but by the remaining Corvin attackers. Now, they knew for certain that their target was the legendary Ghost Battalion soldier. They had been hunting for 15 years. But the restored lighting and activated defenses had shifted the tactical situation in Jake's favor. He was no longer fighting blind in the darkness. He could see his enemies, and they could see him, a middle-aged custodian, who moved like death itself through the corridors of the Academy. The final confrontation came in the main hallway, where Jake faced the last three attackers in open combat. There was no more hiding, no more ambushes. Just a former elite soldier protecting the students who had become his community. The fight was brief but vicious. Jake's years of quiet service had not dulled his combat skills. When it was over, the Corvin separatists were defeated, and the Academy was safe, but Jake Morrison's carefully constructed anonymity was destroyed forever. Security forces arrived to find him standing over the defeated attackers, his custodian coveralls torn and bloody, his true identity finally revealed. To the world, the quiet ghost had been forced back into the light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun was rising over the Galactic Naval Academy when Admiral Helen Carter arrived at the scene. The tall, gray-haired woman had commanded starships during the War of the Seven Suns, and she had seen enough battles to know what real combat looked like. The evidence was everywhere in the Academy's main hallway. Scorch marks on the walls, broken equipment, and the unconscious forms of Corvin separatists secured by Academy security. In the middle of it all sat Jake Morrison, receiving medical treatment for his wounds. His gray coveralls were torn and stained with blood, but his eyes were alert and watchful. Admiral Carter recognized him immediately, even though he was supposed to be dead. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said quietly, walking up to where he sat. Jake looked up, and for a moment, 15 years fell away. He straightened his shoulders and gave her the respectful nod that one veteran gives to another. "Admiral Carter," he replied. "It's been a long time." They had served together briefly during the siege of Europa Station, before Jake had been transferred to the Ghost Battalion program. Admiral Carter had been a young captain then, commanding a destroyer in the fleet that had held the line while special forces units like Jake's had struck behind enemy lines. "We thought you were dead," she said, sitting down beside him.
Ow.
We mourned. "You and your entire unit." The memorial service was attended by hundreds of officers who owed their lives to Ghost Battalion operations. Jake looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry about that. Never meant for people to think I was a hero. I was just doing my job." "Your job saved thousands of lives," Admiral Carter said firmly. "The missions your unit completed shortened the war by at least 2 years. Do you have any idea how many people lived because of what you did around them? Academy security was finishing the cleanup operation. The Corvin separatists had been taken into custody, and investigators were trying to understand how they had managed to penetrate Academy defenses. But most of the attention was focused on the quiet Custodian who had single-handedly defeated a professional military assault." Lisa Park and Danny Wright stood nearby, both looking exhausted but proud. They had been debriefed by security officers about their role in restoring power and communications during the attack. Their quick thinking and courage had helped save dozens of lives, and they were being hailed as heroes alongside Jake. "How did you survive the transport destruction, Admiral?" Carter asked. Jake's expression grew distant. "I was on a separate mission when the evacuation was supposed to happen. At the time I reached the pickup point, the transport was gone, and the system was crawling with enemy ships. I spent 3 months hiding on a dead moon, eating emergency rations and waiting for rescue." "Why didn't you contact Earth Command when you finally got out?" "I was badly injured. Took almost a year to recover. By then, the war was over, the peace treaty was signed, and everyone was focused on rebuilding. I was officially dead, and bringing me back to life seemed like it would cause more problems than it solved."
Admiral Carter understood.
The years after the war had been complicated, with governments trying to balance justice and reconciliation. Veterans of elite units like the Ghost Battalion had found themselves caught between being honored as heroes and being seen as reminders of the war's darkest chapters. "So you chose to disappear," she said. "I chose to serve in a different way. The Academy needed maintenance staff, and I needed a quiet place to figure out what came next." 3 years turned into a comfortable routine, till last night. Jake nodded. "I should have known it couldn't last forever. The Corvin separatists have long memories, and they never forgave what we did during the war." News of the attack was already spreading across human space and beyond. The story of the war hero who had spent years hiding as a custodian, only to emerge when his community needed him most, was exactly the kind of narrative that captured public imagination. Media outlets were calling it the greatest human interest story in decades. But for Jake, the attention was the last thing he wanted. He had chosen invisibility for good reasons, and now he was facing the prospect of becoming the most famous human in the galaxy. "We can offer you witness protection," Admiral Carter said. "New identity, relocation to a secure planet, full military pension. You've earned the right to disappear again if that's what you want." Jake considered this. It would be easy to vanish once more, to find another quiet job in another quiet place. But something had changed during the night. Maybe it was seeing. Lisa and Danny risked their lives to help him. Maybe it was remembering what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. Or maybe he was just tired of running from his past. "What's the alternative?" he asked. Admiral Carter smiled. "We offer you a commission restoration. Return to active duty with full honors. The Galactic Defense Force could use someone with your experience and skills." "I'm not the same person I was 15 years ago. None of us are. But you're still the man who chose to protect students instead of running when the shooting started. That's exactly the kind of person we need training the next generation of officers." Jake looked across the hallway to where Lisa and Danny were talking with other cadets. Word of their role in the battle had spread quickly, and they were surrounded by friends who wanted to hear their story. Both young people had proven they had the courage and quick thinking that made good officers. "I'm not looking for glory," Jake said. "I'm not offering glory. I'm offering a chance to make a difference. The Academy needs instructors who understand what real combat looks like. These students will be commanding ships and leading troops someday. They need to learn from someone who's been there." Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the choice he was facing. He could disappear again, find another maintenance job on another world, and hope that his past stayed buried. Or he could step back into the light and use his experience to help prepare young officers for the challenges they would face. What would I be teaching, he asked. Advanced tactical operations, small unit tactics, survival and evasion, the kind of skills that kept you alive when everything went wrong. Jake thought about this. During the attack, he had seen how quickly the situation had escalated and how important it was to make good decisions under pressure. The Academy's regular curriculum covered strategy and leadership, but it didn't teach the practical skills needed when plans fell apart and soldiers had to improvise. I want Lisa Park and Danny Wright in my first class, Jake said. Admiral Carter raised an eyebrow. They're still cadets. They're natural soldiers. Last night proved that. They deserve to learn from someone who can teach them how to stay alive when the shooting starts. Agreed. Anything else? Jake stood up, ignoring the medic who was trying to finish treating his wounds. I want to keep my apartment off base. I want to choose my own curriculum. I want the right to refuse any assignment that involves politics or publicity. Done, Admiral Carter said, extending her hand. Welcome back to active duty, Commander Morrison. Jake shook her hand, knowing that his quiet life as a custodian was over forever. But as he looked around at the academy that had become his home, he realized he was ready for whatever came next. 3 months later, Commander Jake Morrison stood in front of his first class of advanced tactical operations students. Lisa Park and Danny Wright sat in the front row, along with 20 other cadets from various species. They all looked young and eager, ready to learn about combat and survival from the legendary Ghost Battalion veteran. Also, what you think? You know about war is wrong, Jake began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real battle. Today, we're going to start learning what actually keeps you alive when everything goes bad. The tattoo on his neck was visible now, no longer hidden beneath a custodian's collar. The Ghost Battalion symbol served as a reminder to his students that heroes weren't always the ones seeking glory in the spotlight. Sometimes they were the quiet ones who chose to serve in whatever way they could, waiting for the moment when their experience and courage were needed most. Jake Morrison was no longer invisible, but he had found something more valuable than anonymity. He had found a purpose that honored both his past and his future, surrounded by young people who understood that true strength often came disguised as ordinary service.